name is Dan Hughes. I was the webinar trainer for Nik Software from 2009 to 2014, and now I teach photography at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And we do a lot of printing, and so it's really, I'm excited to kind of talk about a workflow here with PhotoLab for output purposes. One of the workflows we're going to talk about is using PhotoLab to print from. Now, I know that there's a whole wide swath of folks here, from people that maybe have never even opened up PhotoLab to maybe experts in PhotoLab. So I'm going to try and cover all of our bases so everybody's pretty comfortable here. And one of my favorite parts about PhotoLab is that it's a browser-based piece of software. So we don't have a catalog that we have to associate with any of our images or this system. And that just makes it easy for me to kind of plug in a hard drive or receive pictures from a friend or something like that and not have to put them into the catalog-based system. But it still has a lot of really great features that kind of align with or work in a similar way to some piece of software that has a catalog system. Now, if folks aren't interested or aren't knowledgeable or have never heard of what I'm talking about, that's totally okay. But note, to get to these pictures that we're in right now, all you have to do is go to the photo library, and I just realized that my cursor is probably a little bit small, so I'm going to try to direct your attention wherever we're going. So in the upper left corner in the photo library, this is just my folder structure right now on my desktop. And so that's really nice because as I move folders around and so on and so forth, as long as I know where they are, I'm able to find them. All right, so with that, I just like noting that before we kind of get into any of the workflow things within PhotoLab. So this first image we're going to discuss from start to finish. We now know how to find our images within the library. I actually double-clicked, or I clicked on the Customize button in the upper left corner, and this is going to bring us over into the interface where we've got our tools palette on the right side. The bulk of this image, the work that we're going to do to this photograph to get it ready for print purposes is actually going to be using the local adjustments. But before we move into the local adjustments, we want to work the image globally. We want to do global adjustments first, and then kind of work our way into the more detailed portions or areas in the photograph. So if you follow me over to the right side of the interface, we'll begin with white balance, right? And as a caveat, for print purposes, it's a really good idea to have your screen profiled. So you'd actually use a device to profile your monitor so that what you see on screen is as close to what you can get into print as possible. So that when you make these adjustments to tone and color, they are reflected when you print the image. They're the same as when you print the photograph themselves. So white balance becomes very important, especially with a calibrated monitor, because you want to make sure that it's right so that when you print it, it looks good. I've clicked onto the setting pop-up menu here in the white balance section, and there's a whole bunch of really fantastic presets. There's a lot of them actually here in PhotoLab. And I'm going to go ahead and just click on daylight. I don't think we're going to use daylight, but to give you a sense as to why we want to make sure that we've adjusted this. If the camera had been set to the daylight white balance setting, when we were shooting this raw picture, it would be blue like this. It would be too cool. So we would want to go in and to make adjustments. And again, you can do that with the presets here. You can actually do this with a pick color. So there's a little eyedropper. And what you would do with this eyedropper when you've clicked on it on the right is you'd go and find a neutral color in the image. So something that should be gray or without color, void of color. And if you click on it, it's going to adjust the color. Now I went and clicked into the snow in the foreground here, and I'd say that this is too warm. But sometimes using this color picker is a good starting point if the presets aren't doing what you want them to do. And then from there, I would move into our temperature and tint slider, and I would adjust this by eye. Now, in the perfect world, for the tech folks, if you will, you'd be shooting with something like a Macbeth color checker. It's actually a little card that would allow you to get the correct color and possibly even create a color profile specific to your camera. We're not going to get into that right now, but note that those are a thing, and they can be very helpful for getting the correct white balance. Now, I like where we're at right now with our temperature and tint set to where they are. The image is a little bit warm, but I like it. And since we're going to be adjusting the image selectively, one of the beauties of control points in DxO PhotoLab is that you've got white balance adjustments using control points. So you can set a global white balance here, and then later on you can go in with control points and adjust white balance separately using your local adjustments, which is really quite fantastic. I don't have too much to do in this one. I do like to turn my smart lighting on and off. So one of the really brilliant options here in PhotoLab is the DxO Smart Lighting. And there isn't a dramatic change when I turn the little checkbox on and off with this image. But it's enough by default that I think I'm going to leave it at its default setting at least with the mode set to slide at 25. Let's just increase that substantially. What this smart lighting wants to do is kind of correct any lighting problems that might be in the image. And I think at this lower setting of 25, we still have kind of the life force of the image, nice aesthetic to it, but it kind of corrects some of the highlights that were a little bit too bright in the overall photograph. Okay, so moving down into the crop tool. We're going to print this photograph, right? And I want to keep in mind that when we print photos, they're typically going to, or hopefully going to end up on a wall or in a frame or something like that. And those frames are standard sizes, right? Standard ratios. You can purchase frames in a 2:3 ratio, which is the kind of standard for a digital 35mm camera ratio. And that would be, a ratio of 2:3. But what I want to do is actually print a 16:20 inch image of this version or this photograph. So what we're going to do is move over into the crop tool. We're going to click into the aspect ratio, and we're going to use the 4:5 or 5:4 ratio. That's going to be able to give us that 16:20 final image size. So I'm going to click on that, and actually the software will automatically crop for us. It tries to do as good a job as it possibly can when it's set to this auto correction. I'm going to go ahead and just click on the auto correction and go to manual. And when I click on the crop tool itself, I'm going to be able to move our crop around. Now, in our case, I think we've got more sky than we need to. So I'm going to get rid of some of the sky. I'm going to try and hold the nice details down here in the foreground. But we're really going to transform this quite a bit after we've cropped it. And there's kind of two schools of thought with cropping. Some folks will prefer to crop at the beginning of their process, beginning of their workflow, just so that they know what they're going to get. And then some other folks prefer to wait until they're just about to export the image or print their photograph straight from PhotoLab or something like that. In our case, because I know that we're going to print a 16:20, I'm just going to go ahead and crop it right off the bat. And then that's all we're going to get into with the two schools of thought with the cropping actions, because there are, there's arguments for both sides. From there, I like our crop, I like our image globally. Let's not go into local adjustments. Actually, what I'm noticing right now, we zoom in a couple times, there's some extraneous random things in the image that maybe we should get rid of. There's some really cool tools here in PhotoLab to be able to do this, and they're pretty straightforward. And so whenever I can just use the repair function that's in the details section over here in PhotoLab, I do. So what we're going to do is move over to the right side into the details section. I'm going to go ahead and click the repair tool on, and this functions as either a clone stamp or a repair tool, which in my mind works similar to the, not patch tool in Photoshop. I can't remember the name of the tool actually, and that's silly because it's a very straightforward tool. But anyways, we're going to stick with this repair function. Mind you, I've moved over to the left side of the interface. Again, I actually meant to increase the size of my cursor and forgot to do it, unfortunately. So I'll try and do my best. And also, what we're going to do is just size our repair tool to be as small as we can make it while still being able to get rid of the things that we don't want in the image. For example, the light here in the far right here in the foreground, this is kind of distracting. It's kind of breaking up that whole side of the image. So what we're going to do is just click and drag over it and see what happens. Usually it does a good job to just get rid of whatever that issue is. In fact, let's get rid of that little rock there as well. Give that a second. Boom, disappears. We don't even have to think about it. Let's go ahead and get rid of these poles. There's 2 cyan colored poles. And again, we're using the repair tool from the right side. And all I've done is left it on the repair mode itself, set the size to 22. My feather is 0, and the feather is the hardness of the brush. So rarely do I actually operate with the feather at 0. So let's actually go ahead and bring that up to something like 25. The feather is going to be kind of the softness of the edge of the brush. The higher the feather, the softer the edge of the brush is going to be. At 0, where it was just set to, anything that I missed or anything that anything that is sort of on the edge of the object that I'm trying to repair, there will or typically can be a very hard edge around there. So I want to be careful, and oftentimes I'm going to do that by making sure that my feather is up, 25, 50, 75%. All right, so we've gotten rid of all of those extraneous things that we don't want. I'm going to tap Command 0. That's going to zoom back out for us. I'm going to give it a second because my computer fan just kicked on. It's trying to do a whole bunch of things at one time as I'm kind of working too quickly. And once we've finished with our repair, and kind of a lot of the tools, whenever we're going to be editing on the photograph or doing processing on the photo itself, to finish editing or processing using that tool, you want to move to the lower right corner of the image interface and just click Close. Or if you want to look at a mask, you can click Show Masks. Or should you decide that you don't want any of those adjustments that you've made, you can click the Reset button. So I'm going to click Close. From here, I'm going to move into the local adjustments, and I'm going to just use control points. And I'm going to kind of go quickly in this case because the webinar itself isn't really about the control points. I want to get into some of the features for outputting and some of the things that you want to think about for outputting. So I'm going to work really quickly with these control points and just kind of bounce around. And my idea here is that I want to direct your attention as the viewer, or whoever is going to be looking at the image. I want your eye as the viewer to be directed by me, right? I want to be able to control that. We're going to do that photographically by getting the right exposure, by making sure everything's in focus, and so on and so forth. But the other thing that we're going to do is use tools in post-processing to further direct the viewer's attention through the image. One of the main sort of focuses of this photograph in my mind would be the bridge in the foreground and then this yellow tree. So I want to separate the bridge and the yellow tree off of things that are maybe a little bit distracting. One of the best ways to do that, especially using these control points, is to darken the areas I don't want you to look at all that much and lighten the areas I do want you to look at. Right? So the human eye is going to be attracted to the brightest, most contrasty, most saturated thing in the image, or things in the image, as well as the human form and human figure and so on. But long story short, by lightening this tree ever so slightly, maybe adding a little bit of saturation and possibly even adjusting its white balance so it kind of glows a little more orange, it's going to stick out of that background that much more. All right, so I'm going to just adjust the white balance of our trees here. We've got some evergreen trees. Geez, I think they're cedar trees. We're going to cool them down just a little. And so our evergreen trees are going to be nice and blue and kind of cool. And then our other tree there, that yellow sort of wispy tree, which I'm not sure what kind of tree it is, maybe a viewer knows, it's going to be nice and warm, right? So now we've got a color contrast off of these trees from the yellow wispy tree to the more green, cooler trees as well. In fact, let's say we're done. I'm going to click the close button because we're all done editing. Let's just take a quick look at the before and after by moving into the compare button or tapping the D key on your keyboard. And here you can see the original image. And we very quickly, while talking through the whole thing, directed your attention through the photograph quite a bit. I think I darkened down the snow more than I meant to. So I'll just go back and correct that very quickly. The beauty of using control points here within PhotoLab is the fact that it's parametric. We can go back and re-edit them as we see fit. Now, for this image, I think what I would use in Color Efex is a dark and lighten center and a contrast only tool. But for the sake of time, I'm going to show you and talk to you about how to output this image. So first we need to sharpen the photograph for output, and then we're going to go through the print module. And if we get time later on, I'll actually come back and we can I can show you those other Color Efex filters. But for now, follow me to the lower right corner. I'm going to click into the Nik Collection button, and we're going to open up our first tool here. And in this case, since we've done all of the post-processing that we're going to do for the image, we just need to sharpen the photograph for output purposes. Now, as this opens, I'm going to click on Sharpener Pro's Output Sharpener. As this opens, the original raw file is going to be duplicated into a TIFF file in this case, and it's going to launch into Sharpener Pro. And the beauty of Sharpener Pro is that it basically takes the guesswork out of any sharpening that you might need to do, and it allows us to sharpen the ideal amount for whatever output we're doing. So we've got our image. We're going to move into the upper right corner. Here we are within Sharpener Pro 3. All we have to do to get the exact amount of sharpening we want is to tell the software how we're going to output the image. In this case, and probably in a lot of folks' case, you're going to be printing inkjets. So we're going to click on the inkjet setting on the right side from that pop-up menu. And then all we have to do is tell it the viewing distance, the paper type, the printer resolution, and then I also have two more sliders that popped up that maybe you've never ever seen before, even if you use Sharpener Pro constantly. The image width and the image height basically is an indicator to Sharpener Pro as to how big you're going to be printing the image. Now, they don't pop up by default, because by default, the software thinks that we're going to be sharpening for whatever the size of the image is as we bring it into Sharpener Pro. In this case, the native resolution of our image is 9.44 by 11.84 inches. We're printing it at 16 by 20. And one of the keys for outputting images is to size them properly, sharpen them properly, and then output them to your desired purpose, right? And that means if you're printing a photograph, you size it and sharpen it differently than if you were going to put the image up on the web. And to add on to that, depending upon what you're doing with it on the web, you might actually even have different outputs. We'll talk about that part later on in the webinar though. For now, we're going to move into the settings button in the lower left corner of Sharpener Pro, because I need to tell you how you can get those image width and image sliders, image width and image height sliders. So click on the settings button in the lower left corner. Go to the output sharpening settings. Go to the image size sliders. So it's the bottom feature here, and mine are on, right? So they're displayed, and it's actually by default, it's set to do not display, right? Because it's an extra set of sliders that for most folks, maybe you don't need. In this case, so that we can work exclusively from PhotoLab, go into Sharpener Pro, go back to PhotoLab and then print, we want to display these sliders. So I'm going to click display, click OK. We're going to go to the image width slider because that's what's going to pop up now, even though we would have just set that. We're going to print this at 16 by 20, so I can actually click on the sliders and adjust that, or you can click on the numbers themselves and actually type in the exact dimension you need. So now the software is sharpening for that size, but I didn't tell the software what paper type or printer resolution we're operating at. So let's start with viewing distance. This tool you leave on auto. Don't worry about it. The only time you would use viewing distance at something different than auto is if you know the exact distance that a viewer is always going to be standing away from your image. Because this is a 16 by 20, and we're telling the software that we're going to be printing on a luster paper, and because the printer that I'm using, which in this case I'm going to say is a Canon Pro 1000, prints or will print at 1200 by 1200 DPI. I think technically it actually goes up to 2400, but let's set it to 1200 by 1200. Once you've set up the viewing distance, paper type, printer resolution, and your image width, you're done. You don't have to do anything else. You just literally click the Save button in the lower right corner. Now, there are a lot of other features in Sharpener Pro, but we don't have enough time to kind of go down that route right now. So we're going to keep moving, but that's basically all you need to do within Sharpener Pro. When I click the Save button, it brought us back over into PhotoLab. Here is our sharpened image ready for print. And what we do now is move up to the File drop-down menu. And let's actually start with Page Setup. So we're going to click on Page Setup. So it's File drop-down and then Page Setup. And then this is where you're going to choose the particular printer that you're going to use, right? So you definitely want to make sure that your printer driver's loaded, it's plugged in, the printer's on. Obviously, you want to do all of those things first. And in fact, what I would recommend is that you do a head check, right, before you actually print, just to make sure everything's operating properly. And that's going to be different depending upon the printers that you're working on. But you do want to check that so that you don't put in an expensive piece of paper, print on it, and then realize that the heads are clogged or something like that. Once you've chosen your printer type, you choose your paper size. Now, we're printing this image at 16 by 20, and thankfully that's going to fit nicely on a 17 by 22 inch page, but you have all of these different options. And then if these options don't fit whatever you're trying to print for some reason, you can actually create your own custom size as well. 17 by 22 works for me. I actually had set it up before for sort of practicing this demo, so it's kind of good to go. And then I'm going to leave my orientation on portrait because the image is a portrait, and a portrait orientation that is taller than it is wide. And I'm going to leave my scale at 100. Click OK. Once we've done that, we can go up to the File dropdown. That should be sticky, by the way. It should stay that way now that we've set it up. Until you need to change it, let's say by changing paper sizes or something. So from there, we're going to go back to the File drop-down menu, click on Print, and then here we have the PhotoLab 3 print module, right? And it's already set up for the correct printer. I'm getting a little error because I'm not actually plugged into the printer right now. And I've got it set to use last setting as well, which is nice because I've set it up previously to print with this particular printer, so it's basically ready to go. But you can save your own presets as well, and I would highly recommend that. If you're printing at home and you have, a couple different kinds of paper that you like to print on, set your system up with presets so you don't have to remember to go through all of these things and potentially, click the wrong button or something like that. Just set up a preset with all the proper setups, and you're good to go. Very quickly, we have a crop to fill. I don't want this, but if I click on it, basically it's going to try to do cover the whole page. It's going to try to fill the page so that there's no bleed. Rotate to fit. We don't need to do that, but that would basically rotate the image to fit if it were not the correct orientation. And then you can add captions as well. So your image name, metadata, or name and date. Image name and date. And you can change your different fonts as well, or typefaces. We don't have to worry about any of that stuff, but that's all there. Clicking into the DxO image settings, we go to Layout. And in Layout, you can choose your margins, which would be the size of the sort of white border around the sides, for anyone not familiar with that term. And then actually, this is a really cool feature. If you wanted to print multiple images on one piece of paper, you could actually have multiple rows and multiple columns, right? So at RIT, I actually have my students use a system like this to have contact sheets so that they print contact sheets so I can look at them, so I can see all of the pictures that they've shot. And you would do that by saying, I want 5 rows and 4 columns or something like that. Cell size. I think we can actually leave this on auto. Nope, it doesn't like auto right now. And I know that the system doesn't like auto because it's not giving me my little bit of margin, and this is definitely not 16 by 20 anymore. It's trying to print as large as it possibly can on all available space. So we don't want that. We want, in this case, specify cell size, and you want to make sure that this is set properly. So 16, and actually I'm going to set this to 20, even though I don't think it actually matters in this case, because the 16 short edge would end up with a 20 long edge. Okay, so we've done a layout. I'm gonna actually skip sharpness. I actually don't want any sharpening happening here in output because I already sharpened using Sharpener Pro. If I'm not going to sharpen using Sharpener Pro, I can adjust this sharpness setting here within DxO's sharpness to anything we might want. I don't really know the algorithms and the tools behind that. And so what I'm gonna do, because I did sharpen myself already, is just bring that down to 0. And that way I'm not double sharpening, which can be a problem. So you do want to make sure that if you're printing from PhotoLab, you don't double sharpen. From there, I'm going to actually skip over page attributes and layout for now, because we're going to go just hit upon the very important ones and go to color managing or color matching. And from here, I think by default, the system wants to be set to Canon color matching. I'm going to go ahead and just click on color sync, and it automatically found the correct profile for me. But if it doesn't, what you'd want to do is click on the profile and then go find the correct profile for your printer and your paper combination. If you don't already have the correct ICC profile, like let's say maybe you buy a Moab paper or some other paper brand that isn't the same brand as your printer, you'll want to go to that particular manufacturer's website, download the ICC, and put that into your color sync folder on a Mac or the similar folder on a PC. And that's a whole other conversation as well. But for now, I want color sync on, and I want my Canon Pro 1000 setting on. From there, we're going to skip down into printer features. And actually, I'm just going to do that because these are the specific printer features for this particular printer. We don't have to go through all of these things because you probably or maybe have a different printer than the one I've chosen in this case. But these are the important settings to run through to make sure that the color is correct and you have the right size paper settings and so on and so forth. Once you've set all of this stuff up, again, I would recommend saving a preset so you don't have to do this ever again, right? Because you do it once, you set a preset, you're done, you're good to go. And then you just make sure your paper is loaded properly and then click the print button in the lower right corner. For now though, I'm going to click cancel because I don't have a printer set up, and even if I did, I wouldn't want to make a racket and have it print. But basically, that's how we would set up the image to print from PhotoLab 3 in a color managed system. And what we see on screen should be what we get on the print. Hey, Lori, we're going to transition into the next picture, but I'm wondering if there are any questions that have come through that that are specific that maybe I can answer or that might need to.
Okay, I'm trying to find this out too. Sergio and a couple of people are asking if you could switch from centimeters to inches in Sharpener Pro.
Yes, you can. Great question. Yep, and that is in the settings as well. And I believe it's just above. There's like 4 or 5 pop-up or drop-down menus in where we were. I think it's just above that where you can change it from imperial to metric.
Okay, great. Let's see here. And then about borderless prints. Glenn was asking about when you set the image size to canvas size, are you doing a borderless print? Don't think so.
In this case, I didn't have it go borderless. I think that the problem that we would run into with this image with the paper setting that I had would be that the image would have to be expanded to go borderless. And I wouldn't want to do that. But what you would do is just set the ratio in your crop to the correct ratio for the paper that you were printing. And then when you're in the print module, I'll show you that feature. It's in, nope, it's not in layout. It is in layout. You'd click this button, auto, use all available space. And if you have margins set to 0 and your printer allows you to print borderless, this should give you a borderless print. Right, so auto use all available space and make sure your margins are set to 0. Again, the thing is the ratio of this image and the ratio of the paper are not the same, and therefore you have a margin on the top and on the bottom because of that ratio difference. Good question.
Great. Okay, last question for this section here.
Sure.
As far as like X-Rite, the color profile, there are a couple people asking about that, and maybe I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but maybe we could do a separate webinar on that. I think that's a whole different thing to go over.
Definitely. Yeah, and color management Yeah, X-Rite has done an excellent job, and other companies have done an excellent job to kind of simplify it for us as photographers. But it would be a whole, at least an hour, if not longer, to discuss different purposes and uses for all of those things. Yeah, but gladly, I'd love to talk about that stuff.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Absolutely, my pleasure. All right. So the next image that we're going to talk about, the next output that we're going to get into is outputting for web purposes, right? Because we're out shooting these great photographs, and they're 12, 16, 24 megapixels, 45 megapixels, whatever they are. And these are massive, beautiful photographs. When you export for web, you don't use most of that capability. And that doesn't mean don't shoot with a higher resolution, still use whatever resolution works best for your workflow and system. But what we have to think about is that we're going to be taking this large resolution file, we're going to basically be shrinking it down. And then people are going to be looking at it on their phone or on an iPad or on a computer screen. But typically, whenever I'm outputting, and this part gets a little subjective. Some of the things we're talking about are technical. They're sort of like facts of science, if you will. This is completely subjective. In my mind, if I know I'm going to be outputting for web, and I know that I'm going to be competing for the time of people scrolling through thousands of images or hundreds of images or whatever, I want to make sure that my photo has, it has to be good, and it should have pop to it. And in my mind, this is a beautiful photograph. This is an image by my friend David Turner, who's lent me numerous raw files for these purposes, because he knew I was getting low on certain kinds of images. And so this is a little still life photograph of some flowers, and to me, it's beautiful. But I think if this image were to be seen on Instagram as is, it would kind of just, or my website or whatever, or David's website, it would kind of just, people would just kind of scroll by it. They wouldn't pay that much attention. So what we want to do is take this beautifully shot image and give it some pop, and then export it properly so that when it's put up on the web, it's displayed as close to how we mean it to be as possible. And I word it that way because even if you have a calibrated monitor and you're looking at the correct colors and so on, as soon as you look at it on your phone, unless you have a calibrated screen on your phone somehow, or some other person is looking at it on their computer, it's kind of the Wild West. So we want to be careful not to overdo it, but I also want to give this image like quite a lot of pop and some zing, if you will, so that it attracts the viewer's attention. The first thing that we're going to do is white balance, right? And the second thing we're going to do is crop the image, because the way that David composed this for probably the purpose with the lens that he's shooting, there's some edges to it. And we could expand this out, but we're going to crop it 1:1. I'm going to cool the photo down just a little bit by taking the temperature down. Give that a second. That looks good. And I typically check the DxO smart lighting on and off almost every single photograph. I love what this thing does, but one thing that I noticed is that it's a good sort of tell of potential as to what I might do using color effects when we toggle this on and off. I like the density here. Yeah, let's leave it off for now. Let's leave that off. And then the other tool that I always check on and off just to kind of see what's going on is the DxO Clearview Plus. I tend to use this tool selectively for the most part, because what it will do is add lots of really beautiful texture to the photograph, typically. It's also, in this case, darkening down a lot of those highlight tones. And I don't necessarily want that. But by turning it on and off, I get to see, kind of what's happening and why. Let's leave that one off. Let's actually just jump right into the crop tool. In this case, we're going to move into a 1:1 ratio, and we're going to kind of plan to output this specifically square. And in my opinion, we're going to go right to Instagram because it's going to be a square crop, and I had to plan for something. So if the crop isn't exactly where we want it to be, again, you choose the aspect ratio and then go into the tool, and then you can literally just drag this around wherever you want it to be. There are several techniques, like in Photoshop, to kind of to make sure all of these little splines and the things coming off of the flowers are included. But in this case, I'm going to actually crop out some on the right side for creative purposes. We'll call that a subjective choice that I'm making. And I'm going to click close. I actually like what's happening there. I'll save the edge here. There's some tension on the left side, but we're cropping off some on the right side. Let me check my notes. Oh, lens sharpness and my midtones. That's the other thing I wanted to do to this photograph. So even though our digital cameras and our $500 lenses to several $1,000 lenses do an excellent job when making photographs looking directly into light sources, one thing that can happen and will happen when pointing your lens at a light, something that's illuminating into the lens, a light source, is that you're going to get flare, right? And flare is going to affect detail, and flare is going to affect contrast. And so I'm going to be kind of careful here to not overdo too many of these things, because I don't want it to look super obvious as to what I'm doing in the end result. But I do want to correct for the fact that this is shot directly into a light source. And in this case, what I've done is I've just darkened down my midtones. I'm not going to do it much, but what I've found that does, at least with this image and other high key photographs where we're shooting into a light source, is it kind of firms up the edges of things. So rather than it having like a glow edge around the sides, it kind of, I don't want to say it sharpens the edges, because I don't think technically that's correct, but it firms it up. It makes it a little bit darker so it's easier to see the edge. One thing that does sharpen though is if you follow me to the right side here and we open into the lens sharpness, this is on by default. There's a little eyeball that's crossed out, which means we can't actually technically see what's going on until we're zoomed into 100%. So we'll zoom into 100%. You'll notice that little eyeball has disappeared on the right side. And so what now that's telling us that if we turn this on or off, or if we use the global detail or bokeh slider, we'll be able to see the difference. This tool is on by default, and it is based upon the camera lens module that you shot with, right? Meaning, one of the benefits or beauties of PhotoLab is that anytime you bring images into PhotoLab, it reads that combination, your camera and your lens, and it optimizes using an actual profile system that DxO has created and does a wonderful job to sharpen and to fix distortion, among other things as well. But leaving this global slider at 0 is where we're going to go in this case. I just want to take this details slider up. I'm going to bring it all the way up to 100, let it render. I think it's more than what we need, but note the difference. So it's up at 100. Let's turn off lens sharpness. I'm going to zoom in one more time. We're going to get a little bit of, you should be able to see a slight difference. Hopefully you can, even with the compression of the webinar. But here's the before, and then the after is going to kind of snap to. I think 100 is too much, so we're going to back that down to about 70. And this is just going to bring out a little bit more of those textures, and then the edges of our the little, I'm going to call them splines. I actually don't know that's part of the flower, but anyways, it's a little bit sharper, looks a little bit better. And again, we're optimizing so that now we can take the image into Color Efex. So we've done all of our global adjustments. We could move into our local adjustments here within DxO PhotoLab, but for the sake of time, let's go ahead and just jump right into Color Efex. And I've got a combination of filters that I want to show you to optimize the color and contrast and to give it a little bit more pop overall. And then we're going to output for web purposes. So we are going to use the detail extractor. This is one of my favorite filters in Color Efex. We're not going to leave it at this setting. So I'm going to actually move into the left side and close out the detail extractor itself. We're going to start from scratch. So we're here in Color Efex. We're going to click into the detail extractor, which is our tool in our filter library on the left side of the interface. We click on that. It has different settings by default than what they were just set to, which is why we're starting over from scratch. I'm going to leave the detail extractor at 25, contrast at 6, saturation at 6. We're going to change the effect radius to large. And this is simply going to yield us a different feel, a different look overall. Definitely play with this setting. See what this does. If you've never used it before, it's actually really interesting the way that it adjusts. One thing that I notice on this image when I click on large is that there's actually a little bit of what I'm going to call a halo effect around the edge. It's very subtle. I don't even know if it's that noticeable once it's, well, I'm zoomed into 200%, so it's not going to be. It's actually really hard to see. But if we turn the tool off and then turn it back on, watch around the edges of these things. So the before and the after. So I don't want that in this image. I want a little bit of added texture and detail in our flowers, maybe not this much, but I definitely don't want that kind of haloing effect occurring around the edges. So what I'm going to do is take a minus control point from the upper right corner, add a minus control point. I'm going to hit Command 0 on a Mac, or Control 0 on a PC. That's going to zoom us out. And I'm just going to expand the area of influence that control point is affecting out over the entire image. And that should do a pretty good job to get rid of that haloing effect that was occurring around the edges of those things, while still giving us some of that detail extraction in the flowers themselves. If we wanted to make sure that we had the texture in the flowers themselves, you could just go in and place plus control points in the areas where you know you want the effect. I still think that this is too much. So let's go into the detail extractor slider in the upper right corner, and let's just dial this down to maybe 15 or 10, 12. Make it a little bit more subtle. Let's see the before and after. I tend to look at the before and after every filter that I apply, just to make sure that it's doing what I want it to do. So here is the before. Here is the after. I think it's most apparent sort of in the center of some of these flowers here. So one more look at that before and after. We're zoomed into 200%, so the resolution's a little wonky, but here's the before. There's the after. You see it just pops that much more. I love it. We're gonna run with it. From here, we're gonna click the Add Filter button on the right side. We're gonna add brilliance and warmth, and then we're gonna actually add another filter that maybe you've never used before. I am kind of going on a limb there, called Photo Stylizer. It does some interesting stuff. We're gonna use a particular set of settings. Brilliance and warmth, though, moving back over into the filter list on the left side, wonderful filter. I use it all the time for all sorts of stuff. I'm gonna use it a little bit heavy-handed here, knowing that we're gonna end up sending this image off to the web, and I need it to have that pop. So I'm taking the perceptual saturation all the way up to 60%. We're turning it up to 11, as they say. But I don't need it on the entire image. In fact, I'm not a huge fan of what's happening in the color contrast between the yellow and the blue. It's interesting, but it just seems unnatural. And I do want to keep some semblance of a natural look to these flowers. So what we're going to do is take plus control points, and we're just going to put the plus control points on the stamen or pistil here. And then I'm going to take a minus control point, and we're going to remove it from the areas where we know we don't want the effect. So this added saturation is going to give us this really wonderful separation of the colors in our flowers while still maintaining, a kind of semblance of a natural look and feel. Let's see what happens if we increase the saturation just a little bit. And then watch this one. So here, there's the before, and there's the after. It still looks natural. We are using this very strong application of brilliance and warmth that maybe usually we wouldn't do, but it's effective in this case. And now we're getting this really beautiful separation. Like there is some dimension coming out of this image now. And we can direct the viewer's attention because of that. So I click the Add Filter button on the right side. We're gonna add one more filter, and then we're gonna click that Save button. So we're gonna use Photo Stylizer. Photo Stylizer does some really interesting things on any kind of photograph. I think it's effective in this photo because, and we're going to apply it in a relatively subtle way, but there are some different settings. We're going to leave it on Veritone, and we're going to actually change our style to style number 4, I think it is. I can't remember actually, so let's look through it. Yeah, it's definitely style number 4, right? And actually, just to take a look at the before and after, there's the before, there's the after. So we have all of our texture and all of our detail that we wanted, and yet we still have this sort of relaxed, very soft flower kind of feel. I think there's still a little bit too much detail extraction going on. So let's just dial that back a little bit. Yeah. And then let's just take a look at the side-by-side here. The original image is on the left, which I was pretty happy with. And then the enhanced image is on the right. And now we've got form and dimension, and it kind of looks like these flowers are popping off the screen in my mind. And it's just using a couple filters: Detail Extractor, Brilliance and Warmth, and Photo Stylizer. So I'm gonna click Save, and we're coming up on time here, I realize, which seems to always happen in my webinars, but hopefully, and I see everybody's remaining patient. I greatly appreciate that. So what we've got to do now is get this image out of PhotoLab and ready to upload to the web, right? So here's what we'll do. We click on it within our film strip down in the bottom, and then we move to the export to disk area here on the right side. So lower right corner says export to disk. Yours might say export to application because it just depends upon what you used last, but you click on that lower right corner. And then here is where, again, you can set up presets, very easy to do. But what we want to do is make sure that we set this up properly for the kind of output that we're doing, right? This is the export dialog. Anytime you ever want to save your image to a folder or a desktop or whatever. So let's actually run through these. In our case, because we're going to send the image to the web, we're going to process this as a JPEG. We're going to maybe print the image through a print bureau, or you have to get the image out of DxO because you're going to go to a print lab, or you have your own RIP or something like that. You might choose TIFF, but you have three options here: JPEG, TIFF, and DNG for file formats. Quality settings. So I don't remember what the default quality setting is set to, but anytime I go into an export dialog for JPEGs, I always lower it, maybe 10 or 11%. I'm going to go to 91% quality. And what that does is it compresses the file. So it makes the file smaller by throwing out some of the information, but it makes it substantially smaller compared to the loss of quality. So I probably, for Instagram purposes, I probably wouldn't bring this down to 15% quality, right? It would be a very, very small file, but it would probably not look very good. So I'm just going to compress this a little bit by setting the quality to something like 91. This is another thing that we could have an entire conversation about, though, as well, because we can go on for days. You choose your destination. I'm going to go ahead and have my extension. So it'll be my file name, and then it will be extension Instagram, so I know that it's ready to go for Instagram. My resolution actually shouldn't really matter for this. I've got mine set to 96. What does matter is that you enable resizing. So if this is off, this little checkbox here, you want to turn that on, and then you want to export from PhotoLab the exact pixel dimensions you want to upload to the internet, right? And the reason you want to do this, and for Instagram, right now, it's 1080 pixels, right? So that's the correct resolution that Instagram will take. If you were to upload an image that is larger in resolution, it will work in Instagram. It's just Instagram uses its own algorithms, its own math to throw away your pixels for you, as opposed to having PhotoLab do this probably the proper way, and you have some other options, right? So we're making this smaller so we can say bicubic sharper, and bilinear. In this case, I'm going to leave it on bicubic, and then we make sure that the ICC profile, if we're going to web at this point, is set to sRGB. There might be some situations that you would go to Adobe 1998 for web, but without getting into an entirely super long conversation about it, choose sRGB color space, and what you see on your screen should be basically what you get it on whatever you're uploading. So once you've done that, you just click the export button in the lower right corner, and then it's going to yell at me because I've already done this with this exact naming convention. And so I'm just going to go ahead and say use unique name, and so I'll have another version of our image saved to my desktop. All right, well, I went over a little bit on time, Lori, but that's that for outputting for web and outputting for print.
Excellent, very good. We have a ton of questions, but I think I'll narrow it down to a few here. So there are a couple people asking to create a print preset. Mm-hmm. Is that something you could show how to do?
I think so. So let's go to this image. For folks who were in my webinar last week, I I rushed out the door after the webinar, drove to Utica, New York, which is a couple hours from Rochester, and photographed my niece who graduated last, well, a couple weeks ago. This is one of the portraits. Actually, this is the portrait, and then we retouched it and adjusted it, and that's what we got. So let's say we wanted to print this photograph. We would go up to the print or the file, drop down into the print module, and we want to set this up as a preset. So what you'd want to do while you're in the print module is make all of the adjustments you need. So go to the DxO layout, say, okay, this is going to be, let's make this one an 11 by 14. So that doesn't make much sense on a 17 by 22 paper, but just to change it for some, to make some adjustments to the setting here, we're going to print that as 11 by 14. Sharpness, we're going to bring that down to 0 because we don't need it sharpened in this case. We would set all of our settings, however we need them to be. And then you'd go back to the image settings. Nope, sorry, technically I don't think you even need to do that. You'd make all of the adjustments though that you want. Once you've done that, you go to the preset section, and then you say save current settings as preset. And then once you've done that, you're going to name this. So I'm going to call this 11 by 14 Pro luster on Canon Pro 1000, right? So I want to have a naming convention that's going to reflect all of these different aspects. I guess technically, if I set up this preset only for this printer, I don't need the part that says Canon Pro 1000, but I'll just say 11 by 14 Pro luster, click OK, and then that will be saved into the user presets. And that's how you would go about doing that. So I do recommend using those presets. You still want to like second check to make sure that everything's good, but it's way less work to use these presets.
Dan, this is great. Great webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. It was fun.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming out as well. I greatly appreciate it, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
All right, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.